Looks like we got everybody entered now, and I guess there may be some more people joining us as we go along, but we'll let them in as they log on. But thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Johnny Barnes. I'm an extension agent in DeKalb County, and I want to thank Shelly Barnes for helping coordinate some food safety and preservation specialists to speak today. And I want to thank Janie, Burney, and Mark Morgan both for joining us and having a little bit of a panel discussion. They've got some comments and some ideas and that they want to share with us. And basically, I'm part of the Upper Cumberland extension team. There's the Upper Cumberland counties. We've been having kind of monthly Zoom webinars covering a variety of topics throughout this past year. And while some of them have focused more on traditional agriculture, we thought, in the summertime, this is something that's a kind of an important topic as we get into those gardens and people have vegetables and produce coming in, and it's important to know how to properly preserve those. And also we have a lot of information or a lot of comments and questions all the time, particularly about the proper food preservation techniques, and of course also with selling and food processing and those types of things. So we thought that this was an excellent time of the year to kind of cover this topic, and I appreciate everybody that's logged in. We are recording this session, so it will be able to be shared with everyone that joins us if you want to view it at a later time, or for anybody who wanted to be here maybe, but just couldn't make it at this particular time. But again, thank you. I'm going to give some brief introductions of our presenters today, and I'm going to kind of let them get started, I guess. Janie Burney is a professor in the Department of Family Consumer Sciences at UT in Knoxville. She's worked for UT Extension for over 32 years as a subject matter specialist. She's responsible for statewide leadership in nutrition, consumer food safety programs, including home preservation. Each year, she trains extension agents in recommended food preservation practices in accordance with USDA guidelines and assists those agents who receive food preservation and other food questions from the public. And she also prepares publications and other resources for teaching safe home food preservation methods. So thank you, Dr. Burney, for being here with us. And also on our panel today, Mark Morgan is a professor of food process engineering and an extension specialist in the food science department at the University of Tennessee. He joined us at UT in 2013 after 21 years of being a faculty member at Purdue University. And while he was there, he was a faculty member in both agricultural and biological engineering and food science departments. So Dr. Morgan's a professional engineer with experience in the areas of thermal processing, hygienic design of equipment, and process automation. He has extensive teaching experience, having taught 9 different courses in the areas of food process automation, process design, aseptic processing, electric power and controls, and basic engineering analysis. His diverse research background includes biosensors for safe agricultural and food processing, bioactive packaging, aseptic and non-thermal processing. His most recent work as an extension specialist involves assisting food entrepreneurs with commercializing their products and complying with food safety regulations. He acts as a process authority for many food entrepreneurs to assist them in FDA regulations with acidified foods. So thank you both for being here with us and leading this discussion today and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. We greatly appreciate it. As I mentioned before, this is a very timely topic as we get in here kind of the middle of the summer, and people are starting to get a lot of produce coming in their gardens, and a lot of people selling, nowadays at the farmers markets and having different opportunities that they want to preserve food for. And it's just things that we get questions about. And I think it's one thing that covers basically agriculture and family consumer sciences, because I know I get a lot of questions about it as well as our family consumer science agent here in DeKalb County. So it's something that we kind of collaborate on and work together because it is something that's a very timely issue and something that's very important to everyone. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to Dr. Burney and Dr. Morgan, let them get started, because by no means do I have very much knowledge in this area other than being able to eat these things that are preserved. So I'm going to let them get started.
Okay, well, thank you, Johnny. I appreciate it. And Shelley, it's good to be here and see all of you. And I see some of you are extension agents who I know very well. So some of you have been in my classes. It's really good to see you. And I just want to kick off this by sort of a disclaimer. We are in no way the canning police, or we're in no way the freezing or drying police. We are here to help consumers can freeze and dry food safely. So we have no regulatory authority at all. Now, Dr. Morgan's going to get into what happens when you sell products. That's a whole different thing than than canning, freezing, drying at home. So I just want to say that up front. We in no way try to force anybody to do anything. We are here to help you. And if you have questions, unfortunately, we get lots of questions about after you can something, say, and something went wrong, or you didn't do it quite like you think you should have, and you may have questions about whether it's safe to eat or not. So we take it very seriously, because we don't want anyone to become sick. So if we don't feel comfortable, or these agents don't feel comfortable telling you that something is safe, then they will tell you they don't know. We just don't know. And that's kind of the way we operate. And I don't know, Shelley, if you want to add anything to that, or I've covered that clearly or not.
I think that you covered that very clearly, Dr. Burney, and I know all extension agents are so thankful that we have you and other specialists at the national level to rely on, because we don't know all the answers and we get all kinds of questions in, and we have to be able to, try our best to help the public. So we're just so thankful to have you. And then also for Dr. Morgan too, because I know in my county, I get quite a few food manufacturing questions as well. And so I think it's important to have lots of specialists at our disposal so we can ask all the questions we need. I think we'll get started, Dr. Burney, with our food preservation portion of today's session. And I did list in the chat that if you have a question, if you'll enter your name in the chat, and when it's time, we'll call on you to ask your question. Or you can put your question in the chat and I can read it for you, especially if you're having any type of microphone issues. So does anybody want to get us started? And I thought that might be the case, and that is okay. So we also asked people to email in questions, and this is a question that I have already sent to Dr. Burney. It is a question from a client that is interested in this particular food that he ate at a restaurant in Mountain City. And he says that the food was a transformative food experience, and he plans on going back. He said that he specifically had a salad that contained celery pieces, and he felt like the celery must have been quick pickled because they remained crunchy. The big deal was it had a light lemony flavor, and it was not sweet, nor was it sour. He said that it had small whole beets like the ones found and canned in the grocery store, except that they were lightly cold smoked, not sweet, and had a similar light lemon flavor. He is curious if Dr. Burney knows how this food was prepared or processed. Dr. Burney?
That's a tough one, Shelley, because without knowing exactly what that chef did at the restaurant, it's very, very hard for me to tell. But what happens is if it's a recipe, a lot of people have pickling recipes that they've been handed down by family and friends. But we also have USDA tested recipes for pickling. So it really, my first question is, is that a pickled food that will be stored in the refrigerator, or will it be stored in your pantry? Because that makes a very big difference in what we can say is safe. If it's going to be in your refrigerator, we can be a lot more lenient on what ingredients go in there, the proportion of vinegar and all that. And I know Dr. Morgan will probably talk about this too, but the pH of foods is extremely important if you're not going to refrigerate them. If you've got them in your pantry or whatever, and you put them up for several months, then you want to make sure you know what the pH of that food is, and you've handled that food, canned it in such a way that it won't make you sick. And the main reason is due to bacteria called Clostridium botulinum, who produce a toxin. And that toxin is a deadly neurotoxin. Because when you pickle foods, you often use low acid foods like the celery or beets or whatever I think he was talking about. To be very careful that you have enough, if you've added enough acid, typically it's vinegar or source like that. It can vary. That you have added enough acid and you have the right proportions of your vegetables versus your acid and your other ingredients. And we don't recommend that you deviate from that at all, which is a little hard for people because they do have those family recipes. But unless you know the pH of a food, and if that pH is, if that food is acidic enough to prevent the growth of that Clostridium botulinum, these bacteria, then you want to be very careful. So I'm guessing from his question that that it's not shelf stable. So that gives him some flexibility. So and I hate to pass it off, but I believe it's a chef's question because I believe he said he tried the lemongrass, it was too flat, and he tried lemon, didn't get the same flavor. So what I suggested to Shelley is that we might tap into that extension agent in that county, I think she was born and raised there, who may know that restaurant. If it's not too much proprietary information, they might share their secret, and we can share with your client. And then we also have access to chefs here at University of Tennessee through the Culinary Institute program and through the Department of Retail, Hospitality, and Tourism Management. So we can also help connect them that way. That's a long answer to the question.
That is a lot, Dr. Burney, but I think that's the best solution for this client is to hook them up with their local extension agent and have the extension agent contact the chef. And what better flattery to know that someone was coming through and wants to duplicate your recipe. I think that is wonderful. Our next question comes from Beth Hernandez in the chat, and she wants to know, how can you confirm that a family recipe is safe for canning, such as tomato-based pasta sauce?
Well, you have to have the equipment to test the pH to make sure that it's the right, that it's low enough. Because tomatoes, are kind of, you think of them as being acidic, but they're not often acidic enough to make them safe. So I don't know if Dr. Morgan's on. Dr. Morgan, I know I refer them a lot to your department, and in the past, I know there are individuals who are trained to do these kind of tests in the laboratory, but I think that there's a cost associated with this. So I don't know if you would like to answer that or not.
Sure, I can. We do have a laboratory to test pH. It's $10 per sample to test pH of products, but a simple handheld pH meter that you can buy for $10 to $50 will be adequate as long as you check it with some reference standards. So you buy some standard solution that has a pH of 4.0 and you check to make sure that it's reading that appropriately. 4.6 is the legal limit for acidified canned foods, but the lower the pH, the better. So if you could add some vinegar to the tomato-based pasta sauce, or lemon juice or lime juice or something to lower the pH, it's going to be much easier to can and make that shelf stable.
And if you want to save yourself some trouble, you can look at through tested recipes, and that the National Center for Home Food Preservation is a good resource. You can look to see what they have on that site, and you typically can alter the spices somewhat. That's the main thing you can change. If you've got certain spices that you want to include and you don't see them in that recipe, or there's something spice you don't like, you can leave that out, but you keep the other proportions and the ingredients the same as in that recipe. So that could save you some trouble. But Mark, I'm really surprised it's only $10. That seems pretty inexpensive, but you just have to know what you're doing is the main thing.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Burney. My next question comes in from Lebanon, Tennessee, and it's actually happened on a canning visit that I did today. I was testing a pressure canner, and this client wanted to know why his tomatoes were separating. And I told him why, but I thought that would be a good question for you to share with our friends today.
Well, I think usually it has to do with the quality of the tomato. A better quality tomato, and weather and how they're harvested, when they're harvested, whether there's the vines experience frostbite and all that all can change the quality of the food. So let's see, I'm losing my chain of thought here. Oh, okay. What I would do is there are enzymes in those tomatoes actually that cause that separation, and that causes sort of like a yellow serum type of layer that will appear at the bottom. But you want to be sure you follow the recipe, just the process like is recommended by USDA. So lots of times you'll quarter those tomatoes and just maybe a pound of them, you'll squeeze out that juice and so that they won't burn. And then you kind of just crush them gently. You don't want to get real rough with them, but just kind of crush them gently. And in a hot pack, you'll heat them. And if that usually minimizes that layer. But again, it does depend on the quality of the tomato to start with.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burney. That's exactly what I shared with the client. And thankfully, I have learned that from you in the past, from all of our other questions as well. Johnny, do you have a question that came in for Dr. Morgan? Would you like to ask that now? We may be going back and forth, if that's okay.
Yeah, and this is more, I guess, maybe more of a discussion direction, but I guess probably more geared toward Dr. Morgan. But could you just kind of walk through the process of what someone would do if they would like to sell preserved food, especially something canned, as we, I think we get more and more people every year, especially the last couple of years, who are growing gardens and wanting to, preserve food, but are also wanting to sell it to the public. So what kind of is the basic procedure or recommendation of what someone would need to do, say if they want to sell at a farmer's market or a fruit stand, if they want to sell, canned green beans or jams or jellies or whatever it may be, just kind of the basic thing. And I get this question from time to time. Sometimes I can remember who to contact, and sometimes I don't remember because sometimes it seems like it changes a little bit from year to year. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Sure, I'll be glad to. So the first thing that we need to discuss is the Tennessee laws that allow people to manufacture foods in their home kitchen or an uninspected kitchen. So if there is a publication, Manufacturing Non-Potentially Hazardous Foods in Tennessee, that I'm sure these guys can share with you, that will describe some of the foods that can be manufactured in your home kitchen and sold. If you imagine that number of products is very limited, because of the potential hazards associated with many foods. And I'm sure you're all aware that, every restaurant is inspected regularly. Every food manufacturer is inspected regularly. And yet there's still health issues and violations at restaurants and food manufacturers. And there's recalls every day happening from manufactured food. So the reason that regulation is in place is only to allow you to make those foods that we think are potentially safe, no matter how you manufacture them. So they either have a very low pH or a very low water activity, which doesn't allow microorganisms to grow. So jams and jellies, breads, baked goods, putting together a dry spice blend and selling the dry spices, things like that can be done in a home kitchen uninspected. Anything else that could potentially allow bacteria to grow during the processing or in the container after processing must be done in what we call a commercial facility. And a commercial facility could be a rented commercial space that you rent from one of these organizations that rents to food entrepreneurs. It could be an agreement with a church or a school that you use their kitchen when they're not in session, when there's nothing else going on in that facility. And the Department of Ag would allow you to do that. But you have to do most foods, unfortunately, in a commercial facility that the Tennessee Department of Agriculture will come in and inspect you regularly, maybe once a year, maybe once a quarter or something, depending on the hazard level of your product. Okay, so let's talk about the things you can make at home, the jams and jellies and things. Those are specifically spelled out. They have both a low water activity and a low pH, and so they're non-potentially hazardous. And the first thing you want to do is just send us a sample. We have a form you can fill out and send us one of your containers, and we'll measure the pH, because if you take it to a farmer's market and an inspector sees it and asks you about it, they may ask you what's the pH of this product, or what's the water activity of this product, and we can test that for you and give you a letter. Now, it usually they only do that for jams and jellies if you're putting a quote unquote low acid ingredient in that jam or jelly. So all fruits are highly acidic, and there's no problem with the pH normally. I say all fruits, but bananas and mangoes, maybe not so much, but most fruits are acidic, berries, and things that you would make jams and jellies out of, apples, things like that. If you're going to make a pepper jelly, you're going to try to put some sort of peppers in it. Peppers are a low acid ingredient, and that may raise the pH of that jam or jelly. And so what the Department of Ag has done is they'll ask that person to have the sample sent to me. We'll measure both the pH and the water activity. And as long as both of those are below the limit for a potentially hazardous food, in the limit of a potential hazardous food, then they'll be fine with you making that in your domestic kitchen. If the water activity is too high or the pH is too high, then you will have to manufacture that product in a commercial facility. All right. So, and anything else that you're taking in a freshly harvested form and trying to dry, they want that to be done in a commercial facility as well, because the drying step is very critical to make sure that no organisms grow or survive during that drying step. One of the dirtiest things, perhaps microorganism-wise, in your kitchen is dried spices, because whatever bacteria was on those spices is just concentrated by just removing the water, and the bacteria stay behind. So that's why we always have to heat things when we're putting these spices in there, to make sure that those bacteria don't continue to grow in the food products. Another good example is things that have honey in it, and this one's a little hard to explain. But honey in itself is a very safe product. Clostridium botulinum spores may be present in that honey, but they will never germinate and grow and cause an illness, because the pH is usually very low and the water activity is very low. as soon as you use that honey ingredient in a beverage where you raise either of those, the pH or the water activity, now that product becomes potentially hazardous because you had the honey in it. And so if any of you have ever heard of infant botulism, most doctors will tell you do not give a baby under 1 year old honey, raw honey, because it does contain botulinum spores or could contain botulinum spores. It's not a problem for us because our intestinal tract is so low of pH that they will never germinate. But an infant's intestinal tract may be high enough pH to allow it to grow in their intestines and generate botulism. So honey is a very safe product by itself. As soon as you try to use it as an ingredient in something else, we have to be very careful about how we're doing that and making sure that we're testing both the pH and the water activity. All right, so those are things you can make at home. If you are going to try to can any kind of vegetables, at all, or dry vegetables or products, then you need a commercial facility. And again, the process is send me a sample of what you want to do, send me a description of your process, how you're doing it, and I will evaluate that process and tell you how you need to do it to make it commercially safe, to be able to be commercially sold. Now, trying to do vegetables, the only thing that you can probably do with a reasonable amount of effort in a rented facility is products that are acidified. So things that are pickled by adding vinegar or some other acid to them. You probably can't can green beans. You can't preserve green beans or corn and sell those commercially because they have to be pressure cooked, and that pressure cooker has to be evaluated by the Department of Ag. A home pressure canning system won't be accepted. It has to have a data logger on it that records the entire time and temperature of the process to make sure that the product is in fact safe. So things that are acidified or pickled by adding acid to them, we can do those in a commercial facility. Most entrepreneurs can do those. And so the process is to send me a sample. We'll measure the pH. If you want a process letter, if it is an acidified food, then it's another $100 for a process letter. We have to write you a letter that you can send to you would have to send to FDA and file the process with FDA, actually. You'd also have to register your facility with FDA if it's an acidified food. So there's quite a few hurdles, but they're not insurmountable. I have many, many entrepreneurs in Tennessee, in Georgia and Kentucky and other states that are doing this, making hot sauce, making salsa, making chow chow in a commercial facility, and having submitted those forms to FDA and taken a course. You have to take an online course or in-person course that we call Better Process Control School. It is also an FDA requirement for anyone that is manufacturing an acidified food. But I can help, and my contact information, I'm sure they can share. That's what we're here to do in the food science side, is help you get from home preservation to a business if that's what you want to do. If you do want to preserve and sell vegetables that are not acidified, then we can help you find a co-packer, perhaps a facility that has a retort or a pressure cooker that can be used commercially to do those products. But just a home pressure canning system is not going to be adequate.
Dr. Morgan, we do have one person asking, she wants to know, where do the samples get sent to for testing?
Yeah, they're sent to our office at the food science department. Let me see if I can share with you, send Shelly the form, and then she can perhaps share it in the chat while we're talking, if I can find it.
So to kind of go along with that, Dr. Morgan, so, I know several of our counties now have, commercial kitchens and stuff that you can rent out, or like you were mentioning, partnering, maybe with someone to use a commercial kitchen. So the first step, say if someone wanted to do that, would the first step be to contact you or to contact the Department of Ag first?
So they can do either. The Department of Ag will tell them about the business side, and they have a very good website talking about setting up the business and the steps to do that. Getting a local permit, getting a permit from them. They won't, and their inspection process, they won't actually issue that permit and inspection process until you have a letter from me describing how to manufacture that product. So they will tell them, some of the business side and the regulatory side, and then have them contact me to evaluate the product and give you that processing letter. So either one can come first. You can send the product to me and say, is this something I can make and manufacture in my home, in my commercial facility? I'm going to rent space in Cumberland County, for example, or one of the others, Unicoi County or someone like that. And then they can contact the Department of Ag, or they can go the other direction.
Very good. Thank you. Well, I guess that brings up another question I have. I'm sorry, but you mentioned, obviously the process that the producer would have to go through to do that. So from the standpoint of having the actual facility, I know here in DeKalb County, we just got approved for a grant to furnish a commercial kitchen at our fairgrounds. So what does that facility, what does our facility need to do to be available for people to utilize as a commercial kitchen? So does the kitchen, I guess, get inspected, and then also each person is also individually inspected? I guess that's kind of my question.
Yes. The Department of Ag folks will tell you that there's two parts to the inspection. One is the facility, and the other is your process in that facility, your sanitation practices, your processing practices, your container handling practices, things like that. So if your commercial facility is inspected and approved by the Department of Ag already, then they will recognize that, and they will only require that entrepreneur to get their process inspected in your facility. So they will get a permit to operate in your facility using their processes. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
So let's go back to food preservation, if that's okay. And Dr. Burney, one of the most common questions that we get that I get in the summertime is, why did my green beans lose all this liquid?
Okay, I get that one a lot too. It really sometimes, it could be in any number of things. But one of the things that some people do is they get kind of excited. They want to take that lid off of the pressure canner, get that food out, and look at what they've done. And if you do that too quickly, that's a drastic pressure change from the outside air to what's inside that pot and what's inside that jar. So that sometimes can force the liquid out of it. And then you've got green beans that are not covered in liquid toward it. And, it's not unsafe. According to USDA, you can still eat those green beans, even if they're not totally covered, unless there's more than half of the liquid gone. But it is recommended that you eat those first, because they will discolor and it just not look as appetizing. Another thing can be due to overfilling. You have to make sure you watch your headspace on green beans or any food that you're packing in jars. Usually an inch headspace is what's recommended for vegetables in the pressure canner. Unless they're going to expand a whole lot, then you may need a little extra than an inch. But those are typically the two things that and also too, you can experience, depending on your stovetop, how you're doing this, you can experience temperature fluctuations. And if you have a lot of fluctuation, or if you just are having trouble getting it, once you reach the pressure that you want to reach, say the 11 pounds or 10 pounds, if you're having trouble keeping that pressure steady and you're kind of up and down, with your stove, those changes in power can also affect that as well.
Another question that I get asked quite often, Dr. Burney, is what is headspace and does it really matter?
Okay. Headspace is that space between the top of the food in the jar and the bottom of that lid at the top. And it really, really does matter. If you've got too much room in there, too much headspace, the processing time that's been established for that particular food may not be long enough. You may end up under processing the food because of that extra space you've got in there. If you don't allow enough headspace, it can cause sealing failures, because you can just imagine you've got that hot product going up there and around the rim of that jar, because it boils inside those jars while you're canning, and so that's a problem too. You just have several that will not seal correctly.
Very, very good answer, Dr. Burney. Thank you. I get that question a lot. It's especially when I'm judging at county fairs, that question comes up, because the first thing I do is I take the rings off, because you can't see the headspace if the rings are on. So I think that's a good question to ask. Another question that we've heard quite a bit is, do I have to sterilize my jars?
The only time you really need to worry about sterilizing your jars if you're not going to process them long enough. Typically, it's 10 minutes, I think. 10, if I'm remembering correctly. 10 minutes is the time. If you don't process your food in the boiling water bath canner or in a pressure canner for at least 10 minutes, then you do need to sterilize. Otherwise, just using your dishwasher to wash them in soap and water, washing them in your sink with soap and water, and that's all you need to do.
Awesome. And so what if I wanted to can my own recipes, like maybe my grandma's salsa recipe? What would I need to do? Would we just need to contact Mark, or, what would that process be like?
Well, yes, you would need to establish the pH of that product to make sure that it's safe.
And I just can't can that in my home kitchen and know that it's safe.
Yeah, that's true. It could be safe, but it may not be. And, you don't want to take that risk.
So Mark, you had kind of walked us through that process. So what do you do when a client calls and says, I have this salsa recipe that's been in my family forever and I don't want to change it, but I want it to be shelf stable. I want to be able to sell it. What happens after that? Because that kind of agents we don't hear that part.
Right. So if the salsa tests below the right pH, if the pH is low enough, then we can go ahead and write a process letter. What we try to get agents or processors to do is hot fill their product. There's really two methods of making a shelf-stable acidified food. One is hot filling, and that means you heat the stuff in a kettle. So you essentially pasteurize the salsa in a kettle, and then you put that hot salsa into the container, seal it with a headspace, seal the lid tightly or invert it, and that hot product will essentially sterilize the inside of the container and the inside of the lid. And you let it just cool on its own. And if the pH is low enough, I can write a process for that. But the higher the pH goes, the higher we have to hot fill. So a product has a pH around 3.6 to 3.8, for example. I can have you hot fill it at maybe 180 degrees Fahrenheit, which is still hot, but it's easy to keep it at that level. If the pH goes up above 4.2 or 4.4, somewhere around up to 4.4, then we may have to hot fill it at 200 plus degrees Fahrenheit. And if it boils at 212, then it's going to be near boiling, and you got to keep it at near boiling when you're putting it into the container. It may drop 10 degrees Fahrenheit by just being put into the container because of the glass jar or whatever the container is. So we may have to hold it at 200 for 3 or 4 minutes in order to sterilize the jar and the container. And so that makes it a little more difficult, but it can be done. If the pH is too high, if the pH is above 4.6, it has to be done in a pressure canner. It has to be done in a commercial for sale, has to be done in a retort, or we have to try to lower the pH by changing the formulation. So I know people hate to do that, but we have to try to see if we can add some more vinegar or acid of some sort that doesn't affect the flavor, or remove some of the low acid ingredients, if it's a tomato-based product, for example, that will help lower the pH. And those are the only two choices. If the pH is too high, it has to be done in a pressure canner or a commercial retort for sale.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. Now, Dr. Burney, I'm going to hit this back over to you because we all heard Mark say to invert those jars. And he's not talking about inverting in the home kitchen. That's not what he's talking about. So do you want to talk about that for a second?
Right.
We get those questions too.
After doing this with several folks from Mark's department over the years, I can really understand the benefits of inverting, which is just turning the jar over for so many seconds, I guess. And then at that time, that hot product will kill, I guess, mold spores and things like that might be trapped in that headspace. And if you've got a lot of jars, which commercially you're going to have a lot of jars, that will save you time. But USDA is still telling us that when we do this at home, we'll have less problem with mold growth and things like that if we process, use one of their processes. So it's a difference, I think, between doing it at home and probably when you've got these huge loads of jars you need to process.
Okay.
So when you say doing them at home, you're talking about a water bath processor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
If we're going to put it in a water bath, that's the other way, either hot fill or put it in a water bath. If you put it in the water bath process, you don't have to invert the jars. You don't have to fill the product as hot in the container, so you're not going to burn your fingers putting it into the container. But for me to make you a letter for that to be commercially used, I have to put temperature probes into your jars, at least 5 or 6 jars of your product, and I have to record how fast the product heats in that water bath. The FDA won't accept the home canning booklet recipe for water bath processing. I have to demonstrate that I know the exact rate at which it heats, and then calculate from that how much time and temperature it has to be in that water bath to be safe, because we have to heat the very center of the jar, and we can't measure that temperature in a normal jar, right? We don't have a temperature probe in the center of every jar. So we have to rely on a model to predict that temperature. And in order to have that model to predict the temperature, I have to measure that data for your specific product in every size container that you have. If you have pint jars and quart jars, I have to do both. And it's very time consuming, very cumbersome. So we try to get people to switch to a hot fill method for commercially processed acidified foods, because that I only have to charge $100 for. To do a water bath process, I have to charge $400 for, because it takes me almost a whole day to make those measurements and do those calculations for each product. It's a very time consuming process. I can do it. I don't have any problem doing it. It's just expensive because it's very timely. It takes a lot of my time and effort. So that's why we try to push people to hot fill. And we even have people selling bread and butter pickles that were hot filled instead of water bath, because it's a much cheaper and it's easier actually for a commercial production to just hot fill those pickles. Heat the brine up in a kettle, put the pickle slices in there, heat them for another 5 or 10 minutes, and then ladle them into the jars hot, seal the jars, invert them, and they're done. And you don't have to take them in and out of a water bath. You don't have to heat up the water bath and that kind of stuff.
That's very interesting. I'm excited to hear that side of it, because that's something that happens on campus that we usually we've shared the client on with you, Mark, and your staff, and we don't really know yet until they get back to the county and it's all labeled and on the shelf, and we have an opportunity to purchase it. So that's very interesting to know the inside scoop. Now,
I think, Kelly, this illustrates when we talk about tested recipes for the home, it's more than just tasting a recipe to see if it tastes good. That's what we usually think of when we say testing recipes. It's very different. You can just see the processes that you'd have to go through to establish it. And that's why we don't have, for home, we don't have a process for your favorite recipes for everything. It is very expensive.
I think that's a very good point. And that's, it just shows the time, how time consuming it is and how important it is to be safe. So in the chat, we're going to answer this one. And I think Johnny has one more we might end up with, if that's okay, and then call this a wrap. But Brenda Hanna is from Moore County, and she's wanting to know if sauerkraut seals. She has judged at fairs and taken the ring off to see headspace, and the can will just explode. And the person says that sauerkraut does not seal. So Dr. Burney, that one's for you.
Well, the process, we have two processes, for fermentation from USDA. One is for sauerkraut and one is for pickles, dill pickles. But as far as I know, they should seal. That's what we do. That's why we process them, so that they're shelf stable, over months that people keep them. So I don't see any reason why she would think that they don't seal. If you do it correctly, they should seal.
I think this is a common problem. Before we were in an air-conditioned building at our county fair in Wilson County, we had sauerkraut that would open every year. And so I almost wonder if the heat and humidity has something to do with it, if the building's not air conditioned, but we have had that problem before as well. But they do come in sealed. So I do know they seal, Brenda.
So I'm not a microbiologist, but after you process them properly, you should not have a lot of gas production in there, should you, Mark? It shouldn't be a problem, would it?
No, obviously there must be some fermentation continuing in the jar after they've been processed. So they've not been completely processed long enough. And so you're generating gas from the continued fermentation. You have to stop the fermentation by the water bath process.
Does that help, Brenda?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. That was the answer I gave them. But they just didn't want to take my word at it. And I went and asked other extension agents, that was in the building with me also. So now they will not let me take the rings off of the jars when I want to judge.
And this is why you don't taste home preserved foods at the fair, right?
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, Johnny, you had one sent in to you, right? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Actually, this was more of a question or maybe a suggestion from kind of myself. I know, of course, I talked to Shelly about this a lot too. I feel like, especially, in the summertime, I feel like I get, occasional questions of something new or something different. I feel like, there's some newer product, we get more and more people wanting to grow, a variety of some different fruits or vegetables or whatever it may be. And we get a lot more people wanting to do, organic and or natural type products and stuff. And I was thinking, and not to request any more work from Dr. Burney or Dr. Morgan, but as we were kind of mentioning before about some of the products that you need the certification for, or some things that you do need testing for and some things that you don't need testing for. Could we perhaps at some point, and I apologize for my ignorance if this is already out there, but is there some type of a a list or a handout or a publication that might list the different products and what is needed to be able to sell those commercially, I guess. And it's not just the canned products, but you got into mentioning, some of the breads and, candies and some of those things that typically I'll go talk to somebody maybe who's growing vegetables at their garden or whatever, and we'll get into talking about, if they want to sell things at the farmer's market, they'll get into asking me every single thing in the world. Hey, can I sell this? Or I used to make, salsa or chow chow or whatever. They want to sell that. Could we, perhaps have something, that would kind of list, hey, this is the stuff. And I know it varies and some things change, but, that we could have that, as extension agents, especially to maybe say, hey, this is something you got to get tested through with Dr. Morgan and his office, or this is something that you can just sell and not have to worry about it. This is something that you've got to go through USDA to do. And I know that these things change. I've dealt with everybody all the way to Washington, D.C. about selling eggs over the last winter. So I know some of these regulations and rules change and the guidance changes from time to time, but I think that would be something that might be helpful to us all, and I apologize.
So there is a publication that we have, the Selling Non-Potentially Hazardous Foods in Tennessee Without a Permit. It does have a short list of some examples of those that are allowed and those that are not allowed, but it is not by no means a comprehensive list, because the same product in one instance could be safe and in another instance could not be. And so it really depends on the pH and the water activity and how the product is made. So the way TDA describes it is, we say things that we know are safe, jams and jellies and baked goods, and not even all baked goods, right? If it's got zucchini in it, it may not be shelf stable bread, or if it's got pumpkin in it, it may not be shelf stable, and so it may not be allowed to be sold at a farmer's market if the water activity is not low enough. And so there's exceptions to everything, but the general categories of things that are able to be made in a domestic kitchen or a non-inspected facility are in that publication, and it also tries to explain why there's other requirements for people manufacturing that food. They also have to follow what we call good manufacturing practices. And so we tried to describe the basics of those that are relevant for that, making those products in their home kitchen as well. But that's a good place to start. The other answer to your question is to just send me an email or give me a call, and I'll be glad to try to give you an answer. But it may be that, well, I need to evaluate the product. I need to measure the water activity and the pH, just like pepper jelly. Jellies are fine. As soon as you try to put pepper in it, I need to measure the pH and the water activity. And if the water activity is not low enough, then they won't let you make it in a domestic kitchen. If it is, they will, and they'll accept it, and you can sell it at a farmer's market. You just need to have a letter saying that it is the water activity and the pH do meet the requirements for a non-potentially hazardous food. Yeah. So unfortunately, it's not as easy as that. And a lot of problems that I see are from people who are familiar with laws in other states. So unfortunately, every state has different criteria for this cottage food laws. And I hope that we don't go down the road where people can make anything in their home kitchen and sell it without an inspection. Because like I said at the beginning, we have restaurants that are always having violations. We have big food manufacturers that have violations that cause food safety issues. And so there's a reason for that inspection, to make sure that you don't want to go to a farmer's market and worry about that product being safe. You want to make sure that it is safe. And so that's all I can say about that. I mean, in your home, you may say, yeah, I've made it for 30 years, never had a problem. And that's fine. But when you start making a lot of them and you start distributing them under different temperature conditions, different abuse conditions, you never know what's going to happen to that container when it's out of your hands. And so that's where the issues may arise.
So,
somebody
Dr.
not.
Morgan, we did have earlier in the chat, Carol McClure, she wanted to know if we were going to speak any about selling baked goods at farmers markets. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, that's perfectly fine as long as the baked goods fit the category of non-potentially hazardous. So again, as soon as you start to add some vegetable products like zucchini or pumpkin, you try to make a pie that has lemon meringue or some sort of a cream filling, all of those things could make it potentially hazardous. And so we have to evaluate those things. I'm trying to think of the one that the Department of Ag inspector sent me recently, and luckily it did come out low enough water activity and pH to be acceptable as a baked good. It had some sort of it was a cream log of some sort. I forget what it was called, but it was a rolled up log that had cream filling in it, and it may have been a pumpkin bread type thing. We measured both the cream and the cake part of it, and both of them had low enough water activity that we told them, yeah, it's perfectly safe to make in a uninspected facility.
Awesome, thank you. And Dr. Burney, we do have a question in the chat for you. Can you speak briefly to the differences between jars and lids and their brands and how it impacts being able to can safely? Of course, we all know that the pandemic created a shortage because there were so many people interested in canning, and we're still seeing some shortages in some places. She says that she was tempted to deviate from Ball, but she didn't, even though she thought about it.
Well, my understanding is there are some knockoffs out there, and in fact, they're going so far as to put them in boxes and ship them so that they make you think that they're the typical lids. And I can't promote particularly one company, but I do know that what we've seen recently, what the pictures that the agents have been sending me, and it looks like the metal must be thinner because the pressure from inside the can is, it's not quite buckling, but almost buckling, because I think it's not standing up to the pressure is the best thing I could think of. And then we do seem to have more sealing failures. So we don't know the quality of that sealing compound. We don't know how old the lids are either. If they've been sitting around for a long time, you don't know if that compound is dried out or what it is. And then we also, if y'all haven't noticed, I'll mention Ball by name because they have a specific lid. I guess they call it SureTight lids. That a few years ago, they changed the process for prepping those lids. We used to simmer them to moisten that sealing compound and make them stick to the lids of the jar better, but they've changed that where you don't need to do that. So you also have to be very careful that there are instructions that come with those lids, and you follow those instructions carefully. If there are no instructions, it's very difficult for you to determine how to pre-treat those lids before you use them. So yeah, I think you're really, Beth, you're really, my mind did the right thing, because you could stand to lose a lot of good food if you're not careful.
Okay, and one last question, and Ms. Bradley is wanting to know, how does the field of meal preparation fall in your jurisdiction? So she's wondering about meal preparation.
It doesn't fall
Is
in
that for
mine.
me or?
I think that was for either one of you. So it doesn't fall within either of them. However, in Tennessee, we have an extension program in every county, and there should be, and if there isn't now, there will be in the future, depending on, if there's a vacancy, a family consumer science agent in each county. And so you're more than welcome to ask that person those questions. Also, Dr. Morgan said meal prep for sales falls under the Department of Health, and we only evaluate manufactured foods. I do want to let everyone know as well, since while we've been on this call, I've been working on our email that we're going to send out with the recording of today's session. which will also include all of the links and the resources that we have discussed and our specialists have shared. I hope to do that today. If not, it will be early next week. And I want to thank Dr. Morgan and Dr. Burney for being with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Barnes so that he can wrap us up from the USIT team.
Well, I want to just say thank you again, Shelley. I appreciate you kind of coordinating our specialist today to speak with us. Very much appreciate that. I think this was a great topic to speak about. And from my own experience, like I said, I get a lot more questions about this than I ever anticipated when I got into the agriculture field. And mostly it's like I said, I'll go look at somebody's, garden or something, and we'll get into speaking about selling things, or, people will call and ask, it'll be something that's kind of strictly agriculture at the beginning, but then it'll turn into, hey, I've been wanting to sell, these things at the farmer's market or whatever. So I greatly appreciate it. I think that we get, like I said, and actually I feel like my questions have picked up over the last 2 or 3 years, especially. So I appreciate that. And Dr. Morgan, I appreciate I was not familiar with you until today. So I'm going to start sending you a lot more questions and phone calls from now on. So I appreciate getting to know you a little bit better through this. So thank you. But thank you both very much. Like I said, this is a very great topic, and something I think that's going to keep increasing as we go along, as more people are wanting to get back to that growing and preserving their own food for their own use as well as selling to consumers. So thank you again. Shelley, do you have anything else?
Nope, just check for your email. If you don't get it this afternoon, you'll get it one day early next week, and it will have all different types of links from our Extension and Course team to our National Center for Home Food Preservation, and all of the links that Dr. Morgan shared with us as well. So thank you so much. And we especially thank Dr. Morgan and Dr. Burney. Y'all are amazing, and we're so thankful to have y'all as a resource.
Amen. Thank you both for being here, and thanks to everyone that joined us. Y'all have a great rest of your day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.